I'm going to give you a brief overview. It's going to be about 30 minutes, 25 to 30 minutes, and each of the topics that's covered in this overview will be dealt with in more detail by the real experts. I've been using most of these slides for years, and it's truly an honor for me to meet some of the researchers who have authored the studies that these slides are based on. So I'm a little sheepish in presenting these when the real experts are going to shortly join us. Now, a couple of prefatory remarks. We're focused in this conference on the threats posed by the climate crisis to human health. We should not forget that animal health and plant health are also profoundly affected. I think I have one slide on the indirect consequences of threats to plant health, to food supply, but we're not talking about animals and plants, talking about human health. It's not completely comprehensive. There's some factors like increased wind strength that I'm not going to deal with, but I'm going to start with very few slides on the climate crisis as a whole, go straight into health, and then at the very end give the basis for what I think is a growing hope that we're going to solve this crisis. But I always begin with a reminder of the context in which we're dealing with these challenges. This is what the late Carl Sagan described as a Goldilocks planet, not too hot like Venus, not too cold like Mars, but just right. And we have evolved as human beings, obviously, in a climate envelope to which we are well suited. And now that human beings have become the most powerful force of nature in affecting planetary conditions, we are pushing many people outside of the envelope within which we have evolved and in which we thrive. This is an iconic image for me because it's a reminder that the visceral impression we have of the sky as a limitless expanse is in contrast to the scientific reality. It's a very thin shell of atmosphere, and we are using that as an open sewer now. We are dumping 110 million tons of man-made global warming pollution into it every 24 hours. The cumulative amount of man-made global warming pollution now traps as much extra heat energy in the atmosphere of the Earth every single day as would be released by 400,000 Hiroshima-class atomic bombs exploding every day. It's a big planet, but that is a lot of energy. As most people know, 16 of the 17 hottest years ever measured with instruments have been since 2001. The hottest year of all was last year. Last year was the third year in a row that we had the all-time record hot year. So almost 2 years ago, the Lancet Commission, chartered by the Lancet, came out with a groundbreaking study and a special issue. The executive director of the Lancet Countdown, the follow-up to this Lancet Commission, Nick Watts, will be appearing by video. He's the one of the two who was not able to get a visa because of some medical work he's done in Iran, but we will hear from him a little bit later. Our Surgeon General here in the United States has said that climate change is a serious, immediate, and global threat to human health. So just a brief overview of the 8 areas that are considered most important. We'll take them one by one. They're all interrelated. They affect one another. We'll start off with infectious diseases. Andrew Dobson said some time back, made the obvious point, climate change is tilting the balance, disrupting natural ecosystems, and giving more of an advantage to microbes in the struggle humanity has had with microbes throughout our existence. The overburden of microbes is much heavier in the tropics and subtropics simply because, obviously, it's hotter and more humid conditions that cause them to thrive. Just a brief listing of the effects of higher temperatures. They drive vectors into new territory. They increase the reproduction rate, and because most of these vectors are cold-blooded, their metabolism increases, and they bite or take blood meals more frequently. The incubation period for viruses and other pathogens inside vectors is accelerated in warmer temperatures. The contact patterns between humans and pathogens and vectors and hosts are affected. There are higher rates of foodborne and waterborne diseases, and the higher temperatures can trigger other drivers of disease outbreak. The hydrological cycle is also disrupted because 93% of the extra heat goes into the oceans, and so the evaporation of water vapor off the oceans into the sky increases quite considerably. Average humidity worldwide is between 4 and 5% higher today than 30 years ago. That's actually a very big number, and this has consequences because much more of the precipitation falls in one-time storm events. We'll talk about some of the consequences of that, and the one-time big downpours, the period in between them has more and longer, deeper droughts. High rainfall increases disease transmission by contaminating drinking sources. Low rainfall can concentrate waterborne pathogens, and drought increases human water collection, which, as we saw in Brazil last year, one of many examples, gives more standing water for vectors. Increased humidity can facilitate the reproduction of some viruses. Studies have been done on dengue in Asia. And humidity levels above 60% increase the lifespan of malaria-carrying mosquitoes. Tropical diseases have been moving poleward. The transportation revolution, and particularly air travel, has had an enormous amount to do with this. Some of these spreads took place with soldiers returning from World War I and then returning from World War II, and the ubiquity of air travel now has played a big role. But the changing climate conditions change the areas in which these diseases can take root and become endemic. Vectors, we think automatically of mosquitoes and ticks, but we'll hear later today from Catherine Flowers about snails as a vector, and these others are all quite significant. This was a study done a few years ago by the Canadian Medical Association in which they projected the increased range of ticks and tick-borne diseases in Canada, and by within a few decades, virtually 100% of the population of Canada will be within the range of these tick-borne diseases. As many know, West Nile virus came to the U.S. in 1999. In only 4 years, it spread completely across the country, and climate was a controlling factor in the speed of this spread. As many know, mosquitoes go to higher altitudes. Some of the old-timers used to talk a lot about the mosquito line. Some fishing camps were purposely located just above the mosquito line. Some cities were located above the mosquito line. The mosquito line is moving up. A lot of attention obviously has been paid to the Aedes aegypti mosquito. It's one of the two mosquitoes that carries the Zika virus. Albopictus is the other one, but Aedes aegypti is the biggest threat. Its range is expanding in a warmer, wetter world. The range expands, and there are more days when the mosquitoes are active and able to reproduce. Their reproductive cycle is accelerated, and more generations of mosquitoes are born each year. As I mentioned earlier, when their metabolism increases, they bite more frequently, and the Zika virus incubates more rapidly. Here's an example of the interaction of the effect of the climate crisis both on the Aedes aegypti mosquito and on the Zika virus. In a so-called normal life cycle, mosquitoes, the Aedes aegypti develops from egg to larva there are experts here who are far more qualified than me, but the consensus that I've been able to get is that a 14 to 16-day lifetime is roughly mid-range. But the period, it takes time to go from eggs to larva and for the mosquito to mature, and then when the mature mosquito bites someone with the Zika virus, it incubates inside the mosquito and it becomes active, but that process has taken enough days that by the time the mosquito is infectious, its lifetime is just about over. In warmer temperatures, this changes. The period necessary to go from eggs to larva is shortened. The time from larva to the mature mosquito is shortened. And critically, the incubation period for the virus inside the mosquito is accelerated quite considerably. So the infectious mosquito now is biting people for a considerably longer period of days than was the case before its lifetime has expired. Of course, the CDC declared a public health emergency in Puerto Rico last year. Up to 50 women per day were 50 pregnant women per day were being infected with the Zika virus. Since from November to January, there have been 5,000 or 4,000 more cases of Zika in Puerto Rico. And of course, there was the scary warning in Dade County. In a poor neighborhood, by the way, I want to emphasize Dr. Benjamin's comments that poverty is a huge factor here. The Climate Reality Project had a session on this in Houston last summer. Dr. Peter Hotez, who could not be with us today, pointed out that while the attention was focused on Dade County in Florida, he was absolutely certain that it was up and down the Gulf Coast. Not long after that, some cases were found. I bring this up because the CDC does an outstanding job, but there were budget constraints and political maneuvering, and no need to get into that here, except to make the point. We need better monitoring. We need the kind of disease surveillance that will help the public health experts prepare for this and mobilize resources. In other countries, dengue also spread by the same mosquito, of course. It's a flavivirus. India has seen 2 years in a row with very large dengue outbreaks. 37 million dengue infections every year in India now. Pakistan, similarly, one of the worst outbreaks ever last year. A popular downtown park in Tokyo had to be shut down because of dengue fever. In Australia, the cases have multiplied quite significantly over the last decade and in many other places. In central China, malaria has reemerged, and according to the IPCC, the shift in rainfall patterns and increases in temperature are primarily responsible. Other diseases, we won't go through them all, but Japanese encephalitis is increasing. So let's shift to waterborne diseases that are affected by climate. All of these, cholera, dysentery, hepatitis A, typhoid fever, E. coli, cryptosporidium, Campylobacter. Cholera likes warmer water. There are lots of examples of temperature spikes with water at high levels where cholera becomes a much worse problem. I mentioned the changes in the precipitation pattern. It's widely known among these experts, but among most people it's not widely known that more than 2/3 of the waterborne disease outbreaks in the United States have been immediately preceded by these extreme precipitation events. Warmer seas, the spread of Vibrios is one example. This has been in the news as well, directly correlated with warmer ocean temperatures. algae, one of the vectors, particularly relevant with neurotoxins. Just take a moment to absorb the size of this algae bloom from Alaska to Mexico, and an important factor in creating high levels of neurotoxins. Another neurotoxin, ciguatera, also correlated with warmer water temperatures. These are freshwater algae blooms in the United States and the public health advisories. Now, a lot of this is due to the runoff of phosphorus and other nutrients, but again, the extreme downpours greatly increase the runoff that contributes, along with warmer temperatures, to these lake closings and algae outbreaks. Heat stress by itself is responsible in the U.S. for more deaths than all of the other climate-related causes, all of the other extreme weather events combined. That is not true globally. Flooding on a global basis has first place. But in the U.S., we have seen just last year, people are used to these hot conditions in the Southwest, but this was declared by NOAA to be a life-threatening condition last year. Mortality increases 4% on average during these heat waves. We saw some years back in Chicago an example of a great tragedy, and Jan Semensa, who is here with us today from Stockholm, was actually a young doctor with the CDC in charge of this, in charge of responding to this outbreak when it occurred. And just to review it briefly, the spike in the number of deaths exactly correlated with the spike in high temperatures immediately before the spike in mortality. This is a mass grave in suburban Chicago. These victims had names, but they were not claimed. This is an anticipatory mass grave being dug in Pakistan, because they have learned in recent years that they have to get ready for these heat waves, because thousands of people are killed, as occurred in 2015, somewhat fewer last year, 1,200 people in 2015, 2010, 1,300. I could show you lots of these. Last year, less than a year ago, India set its all-time heat record, almost 124 degrees Fahrenheit, 51 Celsius. The government took measures to try to help. At least 2,300 people died in that heat wave. And the people who are most vulnerable, again, are the poor, the elderly, infants and children, those with pre-existing medical conditions, particularly cardiac and respiratory conditions, and the mentally ill. Australia is in the middle of a heat wave right now. Public health authorities there have identified that for a long time as the big killer. This was a few years ago in the state of Victoria in Australia. I use it to illustrate the particular vulnerability of the elderly. And it's also worth noting that nighttime temperatures have been increasing more rapidly than daytime temperatures. The elderly poor without air conditioning get no relief during these hot nights. Last week, just a few days ago, it was 117 degrees Fahrenheit in parts of Australia. Something like 200 locations there that set all-time daily temperature records. This was last year in Malaysia. And of course, there was a great tragedy with the European heat wave in 2003. 70,000 people were killed by the high temperatures there. The epicenter of it was in France, and some of the experts here have spent a lot of time studying that. This is a relatively new finding that in some areas of the Middle East and North Africa, there will be, according to the scientific predictions, areas that will no longer be fit for human habitation, beyond the limits of human survival. The holy cities of Mecca and Medina are in this zone. Less than 2 years ago in Pakistan, the heat index, this is in Iran, the heat index, the combination, of course, of temperature and humidity, reached 165 degrees Fahrenheit, 74 Celsius. No human being can live for more than a few hours outdoors in those conditions. This has been cited by some of the scientific experts as a trend that is going to get worse and will render some of these regions uninhabitable. So the refugee crisis that is even now destabilizing Europe could, of course, become significantly worse. Now, air pollution. Air pollution is a co-pollutant with CO2. Increased levels of CO2, as we'll see in a moment, also have health consequences, but the co-pollutants, particularly the particulates that affect those with respiratory vulnerabilities, kill 6.5 million people per year worldwide. So shifting away from the energy sources that cause the climate crisis also shifts us away from those same sources of air pollution that kill millions of people. This is a map of where the air pollution crises are worse. This is an economic calculation from a United Nations chartered study showing the GDP consequences. It's a proxy for the health costs. China and Russia and India at the top of the list. This is a study that goes back a number of years, but I found it actually to be quite explanatory for my understanding of the relationship between air pollution and lung diseases. In Salt Lake City, there is a large source of pollution, a steel mill, and in 1986 it was shut down for maintenance. And then in 87 it started back up again. So during the period when the source of air pollution was shut down, the number of admissions for bronchitis and asthma dropped off dramatically and then went back up. The same with pneumonia and pleurisy. So the linkage is, sometimes it may seem abstract. What role does it play? Obviously, the doctors understand this very clearly. The same is true of pollution from coal-burning plants. This is the correlation of deaths per 100,000 people downwind from power plants emitting 15 million metric tons of CO2 or more per year. Again, it's the co-pollutants that are causing this correlation with mortality. Coal use by itself is estimated to cost the United States $261 billion per year in health costs. So again, as we solve the climate crisis, we will also be able to solve a lot of these health issues. It's also important to remember that mercury is a co-pollutant from the burning of coal. We've seen the tripling of mercury in the oceans in many parts of the world. It is also a factor in polluting land where crops are grown, and mercury, cadmium, other toxic materials from the burning of coal are pulled by the root system up into food crops. 16% of China's soil is contaminated in this way right now. Their new fifth-year plan actually has a new national law to address this. The air pollution in China is legendary. It is now causing a tremendous increase in mortality, reducing life expectancy in northern China by 5.5 years just from air pollution. The Shanghai Academy of Social Sciences a few years ago pointed out that the conditions are becoming no longer livable. I've met with a lot of mayors, and they're almost always boosters of their cities. I've never seen a statement like the one from the mayor of Beijing 2 years ago, that his city is not a livable city now. Other areas of China are similarly polluted, 4,000 people dying per day. This was in Henan province. These students are taking an exam outdoors, and the headmaster of the school was suspended as a result of this. I don't show this particular slide in China, but it's sort of digital wall art. This is a policeman in Harbin.
And in India, heavy smog also blanketed New Delhi, cutting visibility to a mere 200 yards.
Just this week, the announcement came that air pollution levels in India have exceeded those in China. It's actually been true for some time. A lot of people have said 40 people every day die in Delhi from respiratory illnesses. The number of people who die from asthma in India exceeds that of any country in the world. Here's a study from Harvard and Yale. Cities in developed countries, of course, we have taken steps with our Clean Air Act here, but we still have a problem. Paris has had episodic examples of this. Santiago declared a health emergency last year. South Korea a few months ago. Iran has the single most polluted city in the world where air pollution is concerned, and several of those in the top 20. I met with some folks from Iran in Davos, Switzerland. They are extremely focused on the climate crisis. Nigeria, 94% of Nigerians breathe air that exceeds the safe levels. And I'm not going to dwell on this, but it's important to note that indoor air pollution is also a major cause of death. 4 million people dying prematurely as a result every year. And this statistic is quite amazing. Premature deaths among very young children related to indoor air pollution. Again, shifting away from carbon-based fuels for cooking can also cut these levels of indoor air pollution. Allergens, we will have some experts talking about this. Grains of pollen per cubic meter are expected to almost triple in the next 25 years. And for those of you who suffer from allergies or have family members who suffer from allergies, you realize what this means. Ragweed is expected to increase by 320% throughout the balance of this century. I won't dwell on this, but I hate poison ivy, and the fact that there's supposed to be such an enormous increase in the amount of poisonous oil got my attention. Mental health, again, we will have some experts on all of these factors. Lies Van Susteren will talk in one of our panels later today on the mental health consequences. I'll just list some of them briefly here. Of course, in many areas where people are driven to desperation, it's quite significant. Cognitive functions can be impaired by air pollution as well. Food, we heard earlier about the drop in nutrients. Dr. Sam Myers will be with us. He actually authored this study, if I'm not mistaken. Essential nutrients like zinc, iron, copper, magnesium, and calcium could decrease significantly in the food crops that we rely upon. And this is not because of higher temperatures, it is because of higher CO2 levels. And of course, all of the food crops on which we depend were developed, they say, by Neolithic women during the Stone Age who carefully selected crops that were best and kept the seeds and so forth. And they were optimized for the conditions that we are now changing. So it shouldn't be surprising that these consequences are occurring. just in the last several years, there has been an explosion of concern among food scientists about the impact of heat stress on plants, and also the accumulation of toxins like aflatoxins, but the decrease in yields can be quite considerable. Corn, of course the rest of the world calls it maize, a 0.7% decrease in yield for each day above 29 Celsius or 84 degrees Fahrenheit. This could have a significant impact on yields in the U.S. Wheat, the same thing, a decrease of more than a fifth with a 1 degree Celsius increase in temperatures. I mentioned I would just touch on the plant diseases, but they are also related to higher temperatures and humidity, and this also has an additive effect on crop yields. And of course, we don't need to be reminded of the horrific consequences. A lot of these famines are politically induced and all kinds of factors involved, but the food shortages can be quite horrific. Just to briefly note the fact that water scarcity is a serious problem as well for human health, and all of the significant uses of water increase with higher temperatures. So water scarcity now affects more than 40% of the world's population. That number could increase. Others will discuss this, but the extreme weather events calculated by the insurance industry have obviously been increasing. As I've said on other occasions, every night on the television news now is like a nature hike through the book of Revelation. And just one quick example, Super Typhoon Haiyan crossed areas of the ocean that were 3.5 degrees Celsius warmer than normal. It became the most destructive storm ever to make landfall. Many thousands of people killed, 4 million climate refugees. And Pope Francis reminded us, as did Dr. Benjamin earlier, that the effects are suffered by the poorest, and many of the infectious diseases are also diseases of poverty accentuated by climate. Now, briefly in concluding, I just want to note that we do have the solutions at hand. It is hard to focus on some of these horrific consequences of the climate crisis on health, but hope is justified. We are going to win this. We have solutions that are now readily available. Just to briefly look at the projections from 16 years ago, wind capacity would reach 30 gigawatts by 2010. We actually exceeded that by 16 times over, and it is still accelerating. The projections 15 years ago for solar energy was that it could grow 1 gigawatt per year by 2010. We beat that goal by 17 times over. Last year, we beat that goal 70 times over. This year, we're on track to beat it 77 times over. And there's a new solar farm in Plains, Georgia, you may have noticed, that President Carter put up on his farm also. Coal plants in the U.S., these are all of the ones that were proposed over the last 10 years and defeated. These are all of the ones that were retired in the last 10 years. These are all of the ones where the retirement has been announced. All of these canceled. In the last year, the new electricity generation capacity, 3/4 was from solar and wind. The balance was from natural gas. 0 came from new coal plants. India just announced no new coal imports. China is actually retiring coal plants. Worldwide, this may not look hopeful, but these are global CO2 emissions, but I want you to focus on the last 3 years. For the first time in the absence of an economic crisis, there has been no increase. Now, the bad news is we're still putting 110 million tons a day up there, but we are now at an inflection point, and it is going to start going down. It's not going to go down fast enough. We're not solving this crisis fast enough. But there was a great economist who once said, things take longer to happen than you think they will, and then they happen much faster than you thought they could. That is where we are right now. I'll close with a quote from one of my favorite American poets in the last century, Wallace Stevens. He wrote, well, no, first of all, I want to give you the other basis for hope, and that is the Paris Agreement. Last year, virtually every nation in the entire world has agreed to measures that will take us to net zero greenhouse gas emissions as early in the second half of this century as possible. And here's the quote from Wallace Stevens. After the final no, there comes a yes, and on that yes, the future world depends. Ladies and gentlemen, we're going to take a 15-minute break. Please get back promptly at 15 minutes. Thank you for being at this conference.